always on Thursdays try to squeeze in an autism in the classroom moment. And I promised yesterday that I wanted to talk specifically about the 4 usual suspects in a way that talks about how we utilize this information in the classroom. So we know that behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum, and everything that a student is doing in a classroom is behavior, right? We're all engaged in behavior all the time, and the classroom is no different. And we know that in order to really make a change in behavior, that so many of us have been brought up to think that we say, stop doing that, don't do that. And it's really ineffective, right? And while you're taking the time to say, stop doing that, I know it as being a classroom teacher that, you got one child who's doing something and you say, Billy, stop doing that. And then in the time that you took to spend that energy on that child, another one has gotten out of their seat. And now all you're doing, you're not teaching anymore. You're just telling people to stop doing what they're doing. And you lose people. Sometimes it's very visible and noticeable how you lose people. Other times people just retreat into their head and they're, daydreaming because what you're doing isn't exciting to them, right? This is not the way to teach. You're always running, trying to catch up with your students, and it's not the way to teach. We know from behavioral analysis that for every behavior that's happening and that happens on a regular basis is because it's getting some sort of a paycheck. So we here on the show refer to something as the 4 usual suspects because they're the 4 behaviors that are most often, the 4 reasons why the behavior is happening. And the one that's most common in the classroom is the one that I want to center on today and talk about how you deal with that. And that's attention-based behavior, attention-driven behavior. Every single classroom in the world has at least one student in the classroom who is engaged in behavior because they need attention. When I teach, like to think of kids as being these wonderful clay buckets that are each individually designed, right? And some of them are bigger and wider, some of them are smaller, but they're buckets nonetheless. And you have to fill the bucket with attention. It's part of what you have to do as a teacher. And for some kids, the bucket, runs like it's almost always full, and all you have to do is top it off and say, you're doing a good job. And that's enough for them. They can live on that for a week, right? There are other kids for various and sundry reasons that their bucket is like a bottomless pit and you keep putting stuff into it and you just can't seem to get the bucket full, right? I'm here to tell you that you can, that sometimes it takes a whole lot of investment, but if you don't make that investment in filling that bucket, you're going to spend twice that energy in keeping the child in check and you're going to lose other students. So what are the kind of things that we see when a child is doing attention-driven behavior? This is a kid who sometimes it can show up as them talking out of turn without raising their hand. Sometimes it can show up as the kid who raises their hand constantly. The one who goes, oh, right? Sometimes that's attention-driven. Not always, but that can be. Sometimes attention-driven behavior are the kids who are shooting things at other people or pulling other people's hair or kicking other people or sleeping on their desk, right? Sometimes these behaviors are for other things, but sometimes they're for attention. And here's one of the most important things for all of us to learn about attention. When somebody is in a space where they need attention, then the need is great. And it doesn't matter whether the attention is good or bad. If all things being equal, it's like I'm not getting the attention. And if I'm not getting it in a good way, then I'm going to push to get it in a bad way because that also fills the bucket. We don't want it to get to that point. What we want to do is set up a circumstance where attention comes on a regular basis, but it only comes for things that are good. It's really hard, and it's hard to think of it this way, but if you've got the kid who's like, oh, right? And you say to them, Billy, stay calm and wait till your turn. Guess what? You just gave attention. And it means, oh, is going to happen on a regular basis because it worked. Oh, right? It's a sticky wicket. So we always have to be mindful when you're seeing attention-seeking behavior happen and it's behavior that you don't want to see, that you have to not give it attention. You have to not feed it. So when, you just don't call on them ever when they're doing that. You very specifically call on somebody else and you don't address it with them. But if they raise their hand nicely, man, you immediately call on them and say, that was, good hand raising, and, good job. And even if they answer the question wrong, you say, I just love it when you participate like that, right? So you're really reinforcing attention-seeking behavior that's done properly and giving absolutely no attention when it isn't right. But here's the other thing, is you got to get there before they get empty. Right? Before it gets urgent for them, which means in the beginning, you pretty much have to set yourself a timer, and you can take a baseline on it and look at the kid in the classroom that is your biggest attention getter, right? And try to figure out, like, if you waited 2 minutes and then just ask them a question and say, Billy, what's the best way to do whatever, right? And you gave them some attention. And then you see, okay, so 2 minutes is about how long that went, and you see, oh, he can maintain that because you do it again in 2 minutes, and we're not seeing any behavior that's disruptive for the classroom. And you think to yourself, 2 minutes, every 2 minutes, I'm going to ask this kid a question, only for a very short period of time. Because when you see that 2 minutes works, then you're going to go to 3 minutes. And when you see that 3 minutes works, then you go to 4 minutes, and you're going to find yourself at the end of the week at 30 minutes, which is much more manageable, right? And if you are at a point where the student can go 30 minutes and you give them attention, you're going to get so much more done. It's going to be crazy town, right? And then what happens from there is that you see that, oh, you go to 35 and they're not making it, you go back to 30, right? And you maintain at 30, maybe for a week. And they start to get comfortable knowing I'm going to get attention on a regular basis. Then maybe you go to 32, and then you go to 35. And eventually, by the end of the school year, you're going to find that they're that kid that they're topped off just once a day, and that they can last on that when you say, because they have trust. They trust that you're going to give them the attention. And I want to say that it isn't always what we think. I mean, some kids just need more attention. Some kids aren't getting it at home for various and sundry reasons. And that's not a judgment on the parents and the family, right? Sometimes they're just, sometimes if you've got a lot of kids, you can't give individualized attention to one kid over and over. There just aren't enough hours in the day. But we can, in the classroom, to give 42 kids, and believe me, I've had 55 kids in a classroom before. So when I say this to teachers, I want you to know, I feel your pain. Sometimes you're not set up for success in the best possible way. But you can do it. And sometimes one of my favorite things to do for attention seekers is to give them a job. And when you give them a job, it takes pressure off of you in another way. That sometimes you give the job of giving another kid attention to the person that you get. That's their job. That I need you to help Sandra with her work. And can you do me a favor, and you pull the child aside and say, she's somebody who really needs a cheerleader. So help her with the problem. And when she gets the first one right, make sure you tell her she's doing such a great job. Okay, now wait a second. So now you've got the person who needed the attention you're giving them is giving them the job to help another child who needs attention. And then when you say, you guys are doing such a great job, you fed them both. Oh, it can be so good, you guys. It can be so, so good. Much better way than running around constantly saying, don't do this, don't do this. Instead saying, good job. You will see that you'll have so much more energy for teaching, because teaching is the thing. In the coming weeks, we're going to talk about what the other 3 suspects are, but in the classroom, attention is, I would say, at least 7 out of 10 times, it's attention-seeking behavior. Don't give attention when they're doing that behavior, find a way to give attention when they're doing something good. If you have to, get creative